So much has changed since last Easter. The world has been shaken. Life has been disrupted. What we once called normal seems like it may never return. It's been easy to be discouraged, to lose hope, to feel the foundations of our faith begin to crumble. It's hard to keep our feet planted when the ground beneath feels like shifting sand. Now more than ever, we need to stand on the truth of Easter, a day which changed our eternity, changed our world forever. Death was defeated by life. Sin was consumed by mercy. The grave was swallowed up by victory. See, even in the darkest of moments, the love of Jesus could not be stopped. His faithfulness could not be broken. And when the dust settled, Jesus, he stood alive and victorious. Today, may we remember the truth of Easter, the power of the resurrection, and the promise of eternity. Yes, the world has been shaken, but the grave, it's still empty. And Jesus, he's still risen.
Well, yes, for sure. The last 12 months have been challenging, haven't they? I mean, for me, they've been like the longest 5 years of my life. Hey, it is so good to see you guys today. If we have not yet met, my name is Jason, and I'm so privileged to be the lead pastor here and part of our church family, and glad that you would join us on this Easter. And this Easter, we are focused on Jesus. We're talking about Jesus. It is all about Jesus. And well, I read the story of a Harvard psychologist who observed. Now, this was back right after the 2008 recession, but I think it really applied. He observed that Americans were smiling less and worrying more. And when he looked at the data and looked at some of the information about it, he first thought, well, maybe it's because of the financial situation. But when he looked at the data, he realized that families had enough income to survive. They were really doing well financially, but still, where was the source of the worry and concern and failure to smile? And well, what he concluded is that there was not insufficient income and funds, but an insufficiency of certainty. He referenced a Dutch experiment in which they took some subjects who kind of knew what they were getting into, and they divided them into two groups. And they said, you're going to receive a series of electrical shocks, okay? And one group, kind of group A, they said, you're going to receive 20 pretty intense electrical shocks, so kind of be ready for that. And then group B, they said, you're going to receive 20 shocks, but only 3 of them will have high intensity, 17 will be pretty mild shocks. And so they administered the shocks, and they kind of looked at how they responded, and heart rate and sweating and all that kind of stuff. And interestingly enough, they discovered that the group that had more stress, higher heart rate, more sweating, was the group that received fewer intense shocks. The group B that received only 3 intense shocks was more worried about it and more concerned about it, and the conclusion was that it was the uncertainty factor. The group that received 20 more severe shocks, they knew it was coming, they were certain about it, they could be ready for it, and when they experienced it, it was less stressful than the groups that didn't know when the heavy, intense shocks were going to come. And he, kind of based on that their conclusions there, that the challenge was uncertainty. And when you and I, and it's just part of human nature, right? That when there are high levels of uncertainty and we don't know what to expect, or we can't control our environment in the ways that we're used to, it raises the stress level, it raises our worries, and we begin to smile less. Guess what? Reading the story of Jesus, I see the same thing. That's what we're going to talk about today. So in the stories of Jesus we find in the Bible, everything is going along nicely. Jesus is gathering a group of disciples. He's teaching them. They are starting to believe that he is their Messiah. He is going to be their Savior. They're following him. They're all in, buying into Jesus. He is trying to hint, when we read the story, and man, if you've never read the stories of Jesus before, you got to read them. They're just so fascinating. He's trying to get their attention and hints to them several times that he is going to lay down his life. He's going to die. He's going to die for them. They totally don't listen because that is not in their set of expectations of what Messiahs do. Messiahs don't die premature deaths. They fight and, they win the battle, right? And he tries to warn them. They don't really listen. So that when Jesus is crucified, it catches them off guard. And their hopes are shattered and ruined. They don't know what to do. But then Jesus comes back, and it's Easter, and everything's supposed to be wonderful again. But what we discover is that things are a little bit awkward. What has happened is that for 3 years, the followers of Jesus, they've been going around, they've been following him, and everything's kind of spending every day with him, and then he dies, catches them off guard. Easter comes back. And while we kind of tend to think in our minds that everything was okay after Easter, everything wasn't okay. Everything changed. What we find is there's about 40 days in between when Jesus was resurrected on Easter and when he ascends into heaven. And those 40 days were filled with uncertainty and awkwardness. It seems as if they've spent every day of the last 3 years side by side with Jesus. And now, well, he's there, he's alive, I think, mostly, sort of, but where is he? And Jesus he'll show up in a situation and then disappear, and then show up and disappear, and things are definitely different, and the uncertainty, I think, is really what gets them. So what we're going to look at today is one of my favorite stories. It's probably my favorite Easter story. In fact, as I thought about it this week, I've probably preached this story from Easter on more Easters than any other. In fact, I might have actually talked through it and preached from it last year. I don't know. I was too scared to look it up because then I'd be tempted to change it, and I felt like this is what we're supposed to talk about today. So anyways, you probably heard this story from me before, but I think it is so inspiring. Here we go. John chapter 21. If you want to read along in your Bibles, you can swipe over there in your Bible app, or we're just going to throw it up on the screen as well. You'll see it. But here we go. John chapter 21. Check out this story here. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples, they were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. And they said, we'll go with you. So they went out, they got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Kind of like when I go fishing, sounds like. Now, we may read the story and be like, yeah, I'd like to go fishing too. That sounds really fun. These guys are hanging out, good sense of community. They jump in the boat, go fishing. This isn't, I don't think, a casual fishing adventure for them. This isn't just, we're kind of bored. What are we going to go do? What's in season? Let's go catch some fish because it'll be fun. You see, several of these guys, these followers of Jesus, including Peter, before Jesus came around, they were commercial fishermen. This is how they made their living. And interestingly enough, when Jesus comes around, Jesus calls them out of that into a new vocation. In fact, when he talks to some of them, he says, hey, look, I want to change the entire trajectory of your life. How about you stop fishing for fish? You follow me, and I'll teach you how to fish for people. And we're going to reach people, and we're going to see people's lives changed. And they're like, that sounds a whole lot better of a job than staying up all night, overnight, every night, trying to catch fish. And obviously, maybe they're not too great at it because, well, I hope their job worked out better than this time. And so I think what is happening in Peter's life here is not just he's bored and wants to go fishing, he needs something to do for the day. I think Peter is in the middle of uncertainty. Remember, this is in the middle of the 40 days between Jesus is resurrected and he goes back to heaven ascension, and it is awkward. Where is Jesus? What has happened? We know that he's alive. We've seen him a few times, but where is he? We don't see him. And Peter says, okay, enough is enough. I don't know where Jesus is. Everything's changed. He's not explaining himself. I'm going back. I'm going back to what I know. I'm going back to what I'm good at. I'm going back to my old life. Jesus cast a really great vision for us. We bought in. Who knows where he is now? I'm going back to what I know how to do. We're getting the boat. We're getting the nets. We're going out on the lake. We're going all night, and we're just going to be fishers. Well, I don't know what you guys are going to do. I'm going back. And they're like, well, we got nothing else to do. We don't really know where Jesus is. Let's go back. What is Peter dealing with here? Well, you've already heard some of it. He's dealing with unmet expectations. Anybody ever been challenged by unmet expectations or have been let down before and frustrated and discouraged by unmet expectations? He was their Messiah. They had pinned their hopes on him, and then he went off and got himself crucified. If only he would have been smarter and done it their way, because Jesus didn't live up to their expectations. By the way, some of you have struggled in your own faith life because Jesus didn't meet your expectations for what you thought he should do. And I'm so glad you're here today, but I understand if you're just like barely here, barely hanging in because you're kind of frustrated, and if you would be honest, you're just angry with God because God hasn't done what you think he should have done, and maybe that's a case he's not met your expectations. Welcome to the club. You're there with Peter, right in the boat, maybe saying, let's go back to what we know. I think Peter here is dealing with the confusion that accompanies change. A lot of times we say, I hate change, and it's not so much that we hate change because there's things that we like to change regularly, but it's the changes that we like are the changes that we're aware of, that we can control, and that there's not confusion surrounding them. But when things are out of control and life changes and we don't know how to control it, a confusion comes along with it, and that's what we don't like, is the confusion and the uncertainty that comes along with change. And Peter, I think, here is thinking, man, so much has changed. I can't wrap my head around it. I don't know how to act. I don't know what to believe. I don't know what is expected of me. I'm just angry. I'm going back to what I know. And some of you, 2020 has shown you that you struggle with change and maybe struggle with anger as well. I think Peter's struggling with some loss here. A loss of what he might feel is a 3-year investment of his life. And that hasn't turned out too well, and now the supposed Messiah has disappeared. Did he just waste 3 years of his life? And some of you are thinking, did I just waste a year of my life? Did I lose a year of my life? Does any of this sound familiar to you? One of the things, as my wife Erica and I have been talking about it, one of her major insights that I just think is so great is she said, 2020 taught me just how much I am not in control. And that's true, but I don't like to admit it because there's a little control freak hiding inside of me. Oh, some of you too. And so how do we grow out of this? Because I remember thinking, even a year ago, things are changing, things are weird. God, what do you want to teach us from this? How do you want us to learn from this experience? And well, what we can see happening in, I think, Peter's life and happening in our own lives mirrors kind of this growth process. And I think what we see in the story of Jesus, his life and his death and resurrection, mirrors the growth process that most of us go through when it is time for us to grow, to grow to even a new level of understanding or strength and dealing with life. Well, it kind of looks like this, right? Most of us, we will grow after a time of pain. And so the process looks like this. There is life. There is what we might say that is normal, okay? This is life as we have become accustomed to it. There's some certainty there because we know what to expect. And then death happens, loss happens, pain happens, okay? Now, this can be literal loss of a life, or it can be more metaphorical, the loss of a job, right? Or the death of a career, the death of a dream. So life is going on, and then pain, and then a diagnosis, and then loss, and then something is taken from us, and there is death of that thing, or it could be a literal death of a loved one or a friend. And many of us in the pain and the loss and the grief of death, it is really easy for us to get stuck there. But here is where growth happens. It's kind of why you see that the resurrection is a little bit higher on the chart there, that growth happens when we come out of those difficult situations and we experience a kind of resurrection. And just like that bone that gets broken, when it regrows, it can regrow stronger than it was before. We can be stronger, better, and grow to a new level of strength, of integrity, of understanding through what we might call resurrection or growth. And so, look at and thinking about your own life. Think about Peter here. Quite literally, he would say, I knew what life looked like following the Messiah. Everything was good. And then he died. The dream died. Then he ruined everything. And I think what we see in Peter is this natural tendency of us to think, what do I do now? I don't like this mindset of death, the reality of death, the darkness and confusion that comes along with it. So here's what we know how to do. Let's just go back to life as we knew it. Let's just get back to what we knew because there was certainty. We look back at the good old days, and if we're honest, we'll say maybe they weren't all that good, but what was good about them is that we're certain and we knew how to act and we knew what to expect, even if it wasn't all that good. I wonder if that's what we think when we look back even at the good old days sometimes. Well, we see Peter. He's just like you and I. He is stuck waffling back and forth between the old way of life and this confusing, dark place of death. And so, he says, let's just go back and just go fishing, even if I'm not all that successful at it. And in this growth process, Peter, we might say, is stuck in a death mindset. And I wonder if you today, in some area of your life, are stuck with a death mindset. Part of why you're struggling is because life just isn't working and you've had unmet expectations and you've had some loss and you've had some frustration and you're just kind of stuck there and you don't really want to be there, but this is the reality of life and you're just kind of stuck in that death mindset. Sometimes we describe it like this: I'm in a dark place right now. Maybe you've said that. Maybe you've heard somebody say that. Maybe that's where you are now. You'd say, I'm just in a really dark place right now. Can I suggest that you maybe identify that and to say, what is the loss? What is the death that has occurred that has resulted in me being in this dark place? And what I want you to hear today is God doesn't want you to stay in that dark place. God doesn't want you to stay in that death mindset. God has resurrection for you. And just like we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, what the Bible tells us is that we celebrate resurrection because God is going to resurrect our bodies, and that the healing that happens in our lives, in the specific situations in our lives, is that God wants to bring resurrection in any area of our lives where we're stuck in a dark place, we're stuck with some kind of a death mindset. And I want you to know here that today there is more to the story than it's just kind of a mental thing. If we back up the story a little bit, we go to the just a few days earlier, a few weeks earlier, and Jesus is sitting around the table with his disciples. He's having his meal. In fact, it's the night that he was betrayed. And in the conversation of the meal, they start to argue about who is the greatest among each other. And they're like, no, I'm better than you. No, I'm better than you. No, I'm more holy than you. And they're arguing about who's more holy. And when Jesus' kingdom comes to its completion, who's going to be closest to Jesus, right? And Jesus overhears the conversation, and because I think Peter just talked the loudest and bragged the most, he picks on Peter. Look what Jesus says. Luke chapter 22, verse 31. Let me read this for you. Simon, Peter. It's Peter, right? Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat. But I've prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. But he, Peter, replied, Lord, I'm willing to go with you to prison and to death. Now, don't get weird about this, okay? But just listen. It makes sense that if God, who is invisible, is real and is good and is faithful, that the reason there is darkness and pain in the world is there is an enemy of God who is working against the purposes of God. We can call him Satan, the accuser, the devil. That's how the Bible defines him. All, it just makes sense, right? And here's what Jesus says. He says, Peter, there's something going on here that even you cannot see. And Peter, I know that you want to be all out for me, that you want to live for me, that you really want to defend me, and you really believe that you would go to the death for me, that you would go to prison for me. Peter, there is more happening behind the scenes, and the spiritual enemy of God, well, you have gotten caught up into this cosmic battle of good and evil with God and the enemies of God. And the enemy of God wants to sift you like wheat. It also can be described, Ken, wants to shake you. And he wants to shake you to get you to fail and to get you to fall. And you are going to be shaken, Peter. And I'm sorry, it is going to be painful and it is not going to be easy. But Peter, I have prayed for you that after you have been shaken, that you will stand and then you will lead your brothers and you will continue to lead. Peter says, not me. I'll go to prison for you. I'll even die for you. And Jesus says, no, you're actually going to deny me 3 times. And part of what Peter is dealing with, I believe here, as he's getting back in the boat, is he's also dealing with the pain of regret. His big mouth got him in trouble, and he said, I'll die for you. Jesus said, no, you're actually going to deny me. And when the heat of the moment, as Peter's standing a safe distance from Jesus' trial, and Jesus is being accused of things he never did, Peter is given 3 opportunities, and then all 3 opportunities, he swears that he doesn't even know who Jesus is. And at the last one, Jesus catches his eye. Regret fills his heart and mind, and he runs out of there. And he knows the last thing that Jesus heard from his lips before Jesus suffered and died was that he denied him. And I bet Peter in this moment, as he's out in the boat fishing for fish, thinks, man, at least, the least I could have done for Jesus was to go out fighting. But I went out as a coward. Maybe today you're carrying some regret that you just have not been able to get over. And you're carrying that regret, and you believe in Jesus, and you believe that Jesus forgives you and loves you, but you're struggling with it because you're carrying some regret. You have been shaken. And I think 2020 shook all of us. And we're kind of wondering, where's the certainty? Here's how the story ends. They're out in the boat, unsuccessful, haven't caught any fish. And guess who shows up? Early in the morning, verse 4, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, don't you have any fish? No, they answered. And he said, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some. And when they did, they were unable to haul in the net because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, John, said to Peter, hey, it's the Lord. And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. He's like, who cares about the fish? Who cares about the fishing? Let them all go. What we all really wanted is Jesus, and he's there, and he's on the shore, and he's calling to us, and he leaves the boat behind, leaves his friends behind, leaves the fish behind. He swims to shore so that he can be with Jesus, because Jesus is his point of certainty. Jesus has become his rock and his foundation. The other disciples, they followed in the boat because they were the responsible ones, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. And when they landed, look at this, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. In other words, Jesus had what they had been looking for all along. And Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you just caught. And so Simon Peter climbed back into the boat, dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. And Jesus came, took the bread, and he gave it to them. And he did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. And he's back. Prime figure of our certainty in life, he's back. And he says, I know things are a little bit different and things have changed. And it's not just like it always was, but I'm back. I'm not going anywhere. I have been resurrected. You can still trust in me. And by the way, Peter, you're living with regret. Look at verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And this time, I think, not in bragging, in arrogance, probably with his head hung low, he said, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And speaking to his regret, Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." In other words, I know it's been a rough go. All is forgiven. You don't have to carry regret anymore. You don't have to carry shame anymore. Let's learn from our mistakes and not be arrogant in the future, but all is forgiven. And I'm restoring you to your place of leadership among these disciples of mine. Feed my sheep. And Peter hears the words that he has been longing to hear. And Peter begins to experience healing and growth. We talked about growth, that growth often involves life and then death, and then growth happens when we are able to move out of that death mindset into resurrection and really believing that God has resurrection. Jesus says, yes, life was good, and I was your Messiah. And then I died, and that death was painful. That death was real. We're not going to deny it. It was awful. You guys didn't see it coming, but I have been resurrected. And guys, it is time to move out of a death mindset into a resurrection mindset. It is time to move out of that dark place, Jesus says, because I'm right here, and move into the light of truth and move into the light of the future that I have for you. And no, this is not just a message of positive thinking. This is not just if you just are positive more often, then you're going to move out of this death mindset. No. This is acknowledging the reality and the pain of loss and of death, because what we see is that Jesus, he shows them the scars in his hands. You know what scars do? Scars tell us two things. Scars tell us that there has been pain and suffering, but scars tell us that there has been healing. We don't show open wounds to everybody. Only our closest friends see our open wounds, but we show our scars to everybody because scars are indication of healing. Scars are also an indication of great pain. The miracle of the resurrection is that Jesus' scars that meant death happened in a very short amount of time because God resurrected. And so the healing process in our normal bodies, it takes a long time for scars to heal over. And in the normal process of things, we don't come back to life. But a miracle happened, brought Jesus back to life. A miracle happened and his body is healed instantly, but he still had the scars so they could see. And so it was real, and we're not denying the reality and the pain of death. This is not just, the next day on Easter, everything's wonderful and we're going to forget about everything bad that ever happened. No, Jesus says, nope, there's still the scars here. We're going to remember the pain and the suffering and loss and death, but we are going to focus on healing. So how about you? You stuck in a loss and death mindset? Stuck in a dark place? Where you just can't stop thinking about how much you have lost? Where you can't stop thinking about how confused you are, that so much has changed and you don't know what to rely on, what to believe anymore, and confusion is reigning in your life and you're just kind of stuck in that dark place. You're stuck in the frustration of unmet expectations, whether of God or the people in your life, family, friends, even your church, whatever it may be, that people aren't living up to those expectations and you're just stuck in that dark place. Maybe you're stuck in the dark place of regret, or maybe you're stuck in a dark place of literal death, of the death of a loved one. And no, we do not rush the grieving process, but I want you to hear that the resurrection of Jesus says that God has a bright future for you. And it may take a little longer than you expect, and I think one of the good news pieces of this is that this isn't just an Easter day, everything was made better. This took some time for Peter, and it took 3 occasions for Peter to see Jesus alive before he finally really gets it and gets to that place where the light comes on and he moves out of the dark place and moves into the light that God has for him. So here's how we're going to close it today. I'm going to invite the band to come on back. We're going to sing. We're going to pray is really what we're going to do today. So as I read the words of Jesus, see, what I believe what happened is that Peter heard exactly what he needed to hear. Jesus said, feed my lambs. That's exactly what Peter needed to hear. Also in the book of John, I see a couple of really short words of Jesus, and I just believe if you today are stuck in a dark place, you're stuck in a mindset of death, that there is something that Jesus wants you to hear today, and maybe it's one of these 2 words. Go ahead and put them up on the screen. At the death of his good friend Lazarus, Jesus says to his sisters who are really struggling with this, he says, look, I know there's pain and there's death here, but listen, I am resurrection and I am life. And so today you're stuck in a place of darkness, where death and a mindset of death is just kind of reigning, and you just want to get in the boat and go back to what you knew was normal. Maybe for you today, your word from Jesus is to hear him say, I am resurrection and life. You had a good job, and then something happened. Maybe it was the economy, maybe it was somebody else, maybe it was a decision of your boss. Who knows what happened, but something happened, and you lost that job, and there's the death of a job, the death of a career, and you've been struggling since then, and you've been in a dark place, and what you need to hear today is the words of Jesus who says, I am resurrection and I am life. You don't have to remain stuck in that dark place. Or maybe the word to you from Jesus today is when he says, hey, I have overcome the world. The system of beliefs and behaviors and lifestyles that are opposite to the way God wants us to live, and therefore there's lots of self-destruction and pain. He says, look, I have overcome all that when I defeated death. I have overcome the world. And if you just feel like you're in a battle today and you're stuck and you're being shaken, I want you to hear the words of Jesus as he says, I have overcome the world. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to sing a song, and this song talks about a breakthrough. You see, I believe that Peter got into the boat, tried to go back to his old way of life. That didn't work out, and Jesus stood on the shore, and he called him out of the boat, and Peter had a breakthrough that day, and life was never the same after that. I'd love for you to have a breakthrough today as you hear the voice of Jesus. And as you say, Jesus, I don't want to be stuck in this dark place of death, of a deathly mindset anymore. I want to move into the future that you have for me that is good. I'm going to pray for you for breakthrough today. So whatever you're struggling with, I want you to identify it.